Marhaba and hello once again. I'm historian, writer, Dr. Jack Dempsey, an American living in Crete nowadays. With me is Muhammad Jihad Ismael, a Palestinian writer and historian living in Deir al-Balah, part of the Gaza territory. It's Friday, September 1st, 2023. I guess I should say Kalomina, wishing everyone a very good month from Crete. And today we're taking up again the subject of the 50-year anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. And we think there's a lot that needs to still be recognized about this conflict. It has deep roots and it has had long-lasting effects. First, I always mention that when people hear about the situation for the people in Gaza, 2.5 million of them, half of them children, imprisoned there in their 16th year. They live in a bombed out ruin, shortages of food, especially shortages of water right now, medicines, hospital care, every kind of ordinary aspect of life you can imagine is not working there. It's a daily struggle just to get some food in front of you. Muhammad has sometimes said, you finish one meal and you start thinking immediately about where is the next one going to come from. You just don't know. So we always find that even as our viewership has been increasing, I guess we're getting through somehow, and we're celebrating that. We're very happy and grateful for that. But people always say, well, what can I do? You can write to your own government, call, email, and do all those things again and again and demand changes in the policies that either support or are indifferent to the Israeli apartheid system, which keeps Palestinians as less than third-class citizens on the face of the earth. Second, practice BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, meaning don't buy products that are produced in the so-called occupied territories of Israel, but instead look up Palestinian products. For example, olive oil, which is just the most delicious olive oil you've ever tasted, and it would mean the world to the Palestinians that produce it. They work hard year round, and they have, again, endless obstacles to any kind of success, even on that front. The third thing we call family to family. Muhammad and I have been friends for 2 years, and my wife and I have been blessed enough to be able to help them by sending a little money, US dollars, through Western Union. No NGOs, no banks involved, no big percentage that you have to give away. And the money goes exactly, precisely, visibly to them. You can see at jackdempseywriter.wordpress.com, jackdempseywriter@wordpress.com, wonderful sets of photographs of the differences that we've been able to make in the quality of their lives while they struggle for their equality and freedom. So please think about that. If you really want to reach in, connect with Palestinian people directly, and help them even in the smallest way you can imagine. Imagine what a bottle of aspirin would mean to a family with sick children or toothache. The smallest things you just can't believe that they don't have. And you could be the one to let them know and remember that there are other people who have not forgotten about them. Times couldn't be worse in Palestine right now. There's an almost popular saying that says, we have no horizon. We don't know when this situation is going to end or how it's going to end. You can make a difference directly anytime you wish by just getting in touch with us. There's full information under more information here with this video and at jackdempseywriter@wordpress.com. Muhammad, there's our usual opening, I guess you'd say, and I welcome you. I thank you once again for being with us and looking forward to anything that you might like to talk about today besides our main subject, a second program on the Yom Kippur War.
Thank you, brother, for this new opportunity. You know, I am so happy when we talk together to all the people who are watching us. And I am happy that we have an increasing numbers of viewers. So this gives me higher spirits to continue more and more.
So you see what I mean right there,
Yeah.
just by watching,
Today,
just by his
we are
knowing
going
that
to
someone
talk.
is listening, he feels better. And that is the world of difference day by day, right, Muhammad?
Yeah, exactly. In fact, this makes good change for us, and this is encouraging us to work more and more and to talk about more unique topics in the coming programs.
Yes. Is there anything you'd like people to know immediately this week, the news out of Gaza, things that are happening around you, things you hear people talking about, possibilities, disabilities, new problems? You said that the water situation is very short. It's the tail end of the summer, and I'm not surprised. Here in Crete, also, we only get rain between maybe November and March. And after that, we're on our own without it. So the land burns, it looks incinerated. And I'm sure it's the same in Gaza, which is only a few hundred miles to the east of Crete, where I am. So you say that you have to go at 6 o'clock tonight to get a meeting with the man who supplies you with water. Does he bring a truck, Mohammed, and fill a tank of for water on your roof of your house? Or how do you store the water?
In fact, we have many ways. Some people are wandering with their tankers at the houses, and others are having their stable places. And you have to take your bottles and to go to his place in order to fill your bottles. In fact, after 45 minutes from now, I am going to take my bottles with the help of my friend Tawfiq in order to fill those bottles from this supplier, from this water supplier. Yeah. Every
How many
summer,
days, how many days water can the two of you provide by what you're going to do today? After you finish taking water today, how many days of water will your family have?
uh, each week, I need to refill my bottles again. So
About 7 days.
today I am going to fill my bottles. I think they will last from 6 to 7 days. So next week, maybe on Thursday, Friday, I will go again to make the same procedure.
I would like people to know that again at jackdempseywriter.wordpress.com, there are photos of Muhammad's family. He has two beautiful young twin daughters, Lena and Dina. And he was just telling me today, as I asked him, "What's up? What's happening with you?" that in the light of the water crisis, his daughters are thirsty. And they can only give them these tiny coffee cup portions of water until they get more tonight, thanks to the help of his friend. That's how dire it is. And that's how simple it is for you to help them. You can do it with family to family, and we really hope you'll get in touch. And Muhammad introduce you to some of the wonderful people that live around him. And you can make such a difference. Muhammad, anything?
Yes, yes, brother. Thank you for this wonderful clarification for people. Just to give you a very brief summary for what happened in Gaza. In fact, this week we have very high rate of suicide. Just yesterday we had two cases. 3 days ago we had another two cases. They are taking poison, jumping from high building, exploding themselves with grenades. So you are speaking even about very awful kinds of suicide. Not only taking poison, but in one of these cases, the guy used to explode his body with a grenade. Yeah.
I've noticed for our audience's benefit over my 2 years or more of friendship with Muhammad, talk every week. And I often have the impression that he smiles or begins to laugh when really he wants to cry. So please don't think that he takes any of this lightly. Muhammad, with how old were the different people involved? Last week you mentioned a young man took poison. This week, you've said that the suicide rate is high and it affects all generations. It's older people, people in the strength of their life, and young people too. Is that right this time?
Yeah, but the majority are youth. Most of them are between 20 to 35. This is the most common average for those people who get suicide, between 20 to 35, 36. This is the average.
And there's so many tragic aspects of this, but one is a kind of foundational insight from psychology, which says that often people that are depressed and people that commit suicide are directing anger inward at themselves rather than exploding outward at the conditions that have made them feel this way. And I don't know what to say except that, well, each of these people that has killed themselves have probably wanted just as much to strike out somehow against their horrible situation in which there is no, excuse me, fucking hope. Okay, no hope at all. Can you imagine that? So they're turning this inward on themselves. That's what people do when they've been locked up 16 years. And Muhammad, I hope the whole world hears this and grieves with you, with us, for more people who have given up hope. Let's not let any more do that. Let's reach in and do something about this.
Yes, let me tell you and remind our friends that we talked some weeks ago about the psychological situation of Gaza people. When we talked about this topic, I remember that I mentioned to you that according to some experts, according to some international experts, not local ones, they wrote in their report that there is a big percentage of Gaza population who are qualified to commit suicide in any moment. Yeah, they wrote in the report these words literally. Big amount, big percentage of Gaza population are qualified to commit suicide in any moment. So people who used to kill themselves yesterday and 2 days ago, those people are among this big percentage of people who were diagnosed with this psychological disease, which is uh, the being ready for getting suicide in any time, in any
Yes.
moment.
In other words, they are in their behavior and their expressions, they are showing the same signs that people before them have shown before they actually kill themselves. So there are many people walking around with psychological disturbances, despair, hopelessness, confusion, helplessness, and these are the conditions you'd expect to find in a bombed out ruin of 2.5 million people. Well, Muhammad, these are conditions, if I may move just a little bit here, these are conditions that have come down to the Palestinians, your family, which was kicked out of Shafir, their ancient home village, and pushed as refugees into Gaza, where eventually the doors were closed behind them. And they were, and you are, locked in. None of your children have ever known freedom. Last time in our program, we were talking about, well, the roots of the Yom Kippur War, the October War, October 6th to 25th, 1973, 50 years ago this coming October. Roots many people point to are in the 1967 war, which gave Israel 4 times its previous size. Egypt, they lost the Sinai and the administration of Gaza. Jordan lost the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Syria lost the Golan Heights. And after that conflict, where Israel took over these vast new lands, there were what was called 3 no's coming from the Arab governments who had a summit in Khartoum that fall after that fall. No recognition, no peace, no negotiation. So I'd like to ask your understanding, Mohammed, during the 6 years from the end of the 67 war to the beginning of the Yom Kippur War, Were there, in fact, negotiations going on because Israel was occupying the Sinai, occupying the Golan Heights, beginning to occupy the West Bank? Were there negotiations to try to say, let's straighten out these terrible things that happened in the war? Or did they not talk at all? And that was the reason for 1973.
Yeah. In fact, between the 6 Days War,
In 67.
1967, yeah, and Yom Kippur War, 1973. In fact, we have 6 or 7 years. First of all, we have something called the attrition war. Attrition war has took place between July 1967 until July 1970. So this attrition war, lasted 3 years. In fact,
And what does that mean?
July,
What does the attrition war mean? That both sides were now killing each other, but in a
yeah, yeah,
non-warfare way, terrorism and
yeah,
assassinations?
yeah. Attrition war means simply that both sides, Egyptians and Israelis, used to wage some raids against each others. Mostly those raids were carried out by paratroopers, by heliborne attacks, by helicopters, yeah, by naval troopers. Yeah, so they used during the war of attrition to attack each other by a very, very little attacks. We can call them raids.
Okay.
Those raids were very, very little, but if you want to collect the effect of all of those raids, I think it will be a very, very huge effect, because both of them, Egyptian army and Israeli army, used to suffer from high number of casualties. Yeah.
Now, were they,
In July 1970. Yeah,
well,
yeah.
finish,
Go
please.
ahead.
I'm sorry. July.
Yeah. Yes, brother. Yeah. In July 1970, we have the beginning of the American interference. We have Rogers Initiative. Yeah. In fact,
We are losing your audio, Muhammad. I cannot hear you.
in fact, Rogers. In fact, Rogers used to interfere with his initiative, which asked both sides, Egyptians and Israelis, to make a ceasefire without conditions. So it's an unconditional ceasefire between both armies, Egyptians and Israelis. Yeah.
They accept that?
After the Yeah. In fact, they respected this ceasefire, but we have some few violations were conducted by the two sides, and finally we have the sudden war and the sudden attack of the Arabs in the Yom Kippur War, 6 October 1973. So
Now,
between the two wars, we have one war. It was the war of attrition, and we have one political procedure, which was Rogers' initiative.
okay, now, meanwhile, through that 6 years between the two wars of 67 and 73, is it so that Egypt was demanding the return of the Sinai, Jordan was demanding the return of the West Bank, and Syria was demanding the return of the Golan Heights? Were the Arabs through that 6-year period demanding that the Israelis get out of those conquered lands?
In fact, Jordan was not demanding for the return of West Bank because simply West Bank is not a Jordanian territory. West Bank is a Palestinian land, but it's different for Egypt and Syria because Golan Heights are originally Assyrian territories, and the same thing in Egypt. Sinai Peninsula is an Egyptian territories.
Yes.
So both of Syria and Egypt kept demanding for regaining their stolen lands or their occupied lands, the Golan Heights and Sinai.
Yeah. And it sounds as though, too, from Jordan, that there was an implicit recognition of the Palestinians as people with rights, as people who needed a good administration to handle the huge numbers of refugees that had been thrown out of Palestine by Israel. And so during that war of 67, they lost control of that West Bank administrative role for the Palestinians. It seems like they recognized that the Palestinians were, I don't want to say a nation because that's not a description of the Palestinian social structure. It's something else. It's very solid, very ancient, unique, sophisticated. It doesn't fit your average idea of a nation state. Nonetheless, Jordan was recognizing them. So were Egypt and Syria.
Yes.
They also speaking up for the Palestinians.
Yes, of course, the same thing. Yeah. Also, when Egypt used to make negotiations in Vienna with the Israelis under an American supervision, and after that, when they reached the Camp David agreement, in fact, Sadat didn't ask the Israelis for regaining Gaza to the Egyptian administration. He didn't ask. Yeah. He didn't ask with this because he really considered that Gaza is part of Palestine. So he hasn't the right to demand the return of Gaza. Yeah, the same thing.
So Sadat wanted the Palestinian people to begin to govern themselves again in the Gaza territory. He wanted them to be on their own so that they would grow their own political organization and whatnot, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And meanwhile, Golda Meier, about whom a new movie is coming out that is catching a lot of criticism for the way it makes a saint of her. One of her most famous statements is, we're not going to negotiate with the Palestinians at that time, 73 and just about coming to the war. We're not going to negotiate with the Palestinians because they don't exist, she says. There are no Palestinians. They don't exist. So that might give an indication of how all the negotiation was being received by Israel and reacted to. And slowly, maybe Sadat and Assad in Syria were becoming fed up with this and began their plan for the Yom Kippur attack. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, you are right. Golda Meir was trying to neglect the existence of the Palestinian people in that time.
And you know where her family was from? Her family was from Ukraine.
Yeah. Most of them were originally from Ukraine, Lithuania, Moldova, Belarus, Poland. Yeah, from the Eastern Bloc countries. Yeah. In fact, we have very smart action was conducted and was implemented by Yasser Arafat because he used in the following year, in 1974, he used to go to New York and he delivered his historical speech in front of the United Nations.
Yes.
So this is the biggest response against Golda Meir claims when she claimed that there is no existence for Palestinians, there is no existence for Palestinian people. Arafat, after very few months, he used to respond with a very, very brilliant way when he delivered his speech in the United Nations.
Did he say?
And,
What was the most important thing?
Another procedure, and another procedure was taken by Arabs in the Arabian Summit in Morocco. They used to declare in front of all the world that PLO is the only representative of the Palestinian people, and they are responsible for finding a just solution for their crisis, for their conflict with Israelis. So we had two responses, one from Arafat in the United Nations, and the second one was conducted by the Arabian League Summit in Morocco, when they declared PLO as the responsible and the only representative for the Palestinian people.
Mm-hmm. Now, many people who look at all at the Yom Kippur War, they talk about it as a sneak attack on Israel by the Arab countries. In other words, they concealed it, prepared it in secret, and then they launched it, and that gave them an early advantage in the war before Israel's might and American support and ammunition came in to turn the tide of that war. But they never mentioned that 1967 was the Israelis' surprise war. They always say that, oh, they were going to attack us, but there's no evidence for that now. Historians across the board will tell you that there was no evidence for the Arab countries getting ready to attack Israel in 1967. They did it to grab territory. So it's interesting that when Israel makes a sneak attack, they hit the Egyptian Air Force on the ground, first order of business. When they make a sneak attack, it's preemptive, it's to stop you from being evil. But when the Arab people, as you importantly said last time, want to liberate the Sinai from Israeli occupation and liberate the Golan from Israeli occupation and liberate West Bank and East Jerusalem from Israeli occupation, this to the Arab people is a war of liberation. These were traditional lands and places that were taken from them by war and were supposed to be returned under international law once the settlement had been made. So Yom Kippur was a war of Arab liberation, not a sneak attack to destroy Israel. And you argued in detail last program, it was not a war that intended to destroy Israel. They never attacked in the hinterlands. They only went to liberate those territories that had been taken. Excuse me for talking so much, Muhammad, but please tell me your thoughts.
Yeah, I am assuring again that the Arab assault, the Arab offensive in October 1973 was targeting only liberating the lands of Sinai and Golan Heights. Because in that time, Arabs hadn't the ability and hadn't the qualified weapons which can reach the hinterland of Israel. They hadn't the enough range for weapons like missiles, land-to-land missiles, attack aircrafts. Yeah, most of their weapons were defensive, not offensive weapons. In fact, Soviet Union used to help them and supply them with only defensive weapons. They hadn't, for instance, the ability to attack Tel Aviv, Haifa, other major Israeli cities. This is number one. Number two, in fact, Arab states in that time were afraid from the Israeli nuclear arsenal. Of course, they hadn't the ability to attack the hinterland of Israel because they know very well that Golda Meir will violate the red lines and will respond with striking the Arab major capitals like Damascus, Cairo, with nuclear attacks and the nuclear bombs. So they are not crazy to attack the hinterland of Israel because they haven't the enough and the well-qualified weapons. And of course, they are afraid from Samson's option, the option of Samson's.
Yes, nuclear.
And here we have to shed the light on the book of Seymour Hirsch, Samson's option. Seymour Hirsch, in his book, used to write in a very deep details how the Israeli army used to qualify his fighters, his land-to-land missiles with the nuclear warheads. And they were about to attack both Syria and Egypt with this nuclear army, but Nixon asked them to stop this crazy action, and he promised them just stop this action, and in a very few hours, the American airlift will start sending you thousands of tons of tanks, vehicles, ammunition, weapons. Yeah, and after that, as you know, between 9 and 10 October, USA army started to supply Israel with this airlift directly from USA to Israel.
Yes. And Muhammad, something else important that you mentioned in our last program that I think we could explore more as well is that one of the consequences of the Yom Kippur War, as a stalemate, more or less as a stalemate of the military forces, was that Israel, after the war had ceased, came down even harder than ever on the Palestinian people. Israel took out their frustrations on the battlefield on the Palestinian civilian population in the months and years after that war. Is that what you learned from your studies, from talking with people and all that? How do they describe that? They came down much harder after the war on Palestinians.
Yeah, of course. In fact, the casualties of the Israelis was very, very expensive. I think we have like 3,000 were killed, more than 10,000 were injured, in addition to hundreds of prisoners. Comparing to the population of Israel, in that time, Israel population was only 2.5 million. The same population of Gaza now. According to the population of Israel in that time, this amount of casualties was very, very big and very, very huge. So Israelis got very, very angry, and unfortunately, they didn't find in front of their faces any Arab except the Palestinians. So they started to make a campaign of aggression against the Palestinians in Gaza and West Bank, and they killed.
And they started to build the walls and the barriers and the legal system and the apartheid system, so as to separate and keep out the quote terrorists who were completely within their rights under international law to struggle any way necessary. That's the UN's language. By any means necessary to end the occupation of their land. You know, we have less than 5 minutes, Muhammad, but I'd like to jump to one other important thing you said too, that when we mentioned Golda Meir being the prime minister at the time of the Yom Kippur War, and she being a person who could say Palestinians do not exist. I'm sure everybody that's listening today can look back on this with us and now think, now it's no wonder things are so bad as they are right now with people like Smotrich and Ben Gvir and Netanyahu and the Likud assembly and the Israeli Knesset, that there is so much exclusion and anger at Palestinians. This was all laid down in the groundwork of the Yom Kippur War. The very way of thinking about Palestinians changed, all for the worse, inside the Israeli establishment.
Yes, brother. Before I forget, in order to be honest with the people who are watching us, I have to mention a very, very important matter. In fact, one of the consequences of Yom Kippur War that in the late 70s and early 80s, when Israelis, according to Camp David agreement, when they were making their withdrawal out of Sinai, in that time they used to move out of Sinai some Israeli settlements. They used to move them from Sinai to Gaza. So they used to move them from Sinai, and they used to rebuild them inside Gaza. Yeah,
So
and maybe one of
there were already Israeli settlers in the Sinai planning to occupy that land forever.
yeah,
I don't think many people know that.
directly.
Wow.
Directly. Whenever they invaded Sinai, the second day they used to bring some caravans and to establish some communities, some
Yes.
villages,
Well, that
and they
sounds familiar,
used to
doesn't it?
make and they used to make plantations. They used to plant some trees,
And
some
protected by the
olives, some
army, protected by the Israeli army, protected by
exactly.
Israeli law,
Yeah,
and they intended fully to occupy and make it a full part of Israel, the occupied Sinai.
yeah, and of course you are right. They used to justify this action by law, and also they used to justify it by Bible when they mentioned many times and when they declared many times in their media that this is the land of Exodus, this is the land of Mount Horeb, the Mount of Sinai. It's our land, and we regain it from the Egyptians. So they used also to justify their action with the biblical text. Yeah.
The, the, finish, go ahead.
So many so many settlements were moved from Sinai to Gaza Strip, and the most famous settlement was named Eli Sinai, and if you look to the name Eli Sinai,
Sinai.
yeah, Sinai, yeah, exactly, Sinai in English, yeah. This was the most famous one. I think they are 3 or 4 settlements in general. They used to move them from Sinai to inside Gaza
And
Strip.
that
Yeah.
and that
So
became
this is another.
that became another legacy of problems. By the way, for our viewers who don't read the Bible every day, the Samson option refers to the old legend of Samson when the Philistines, the Palestinians, tied him to the 2 pillars of a temple. And when he knew he could not escape or win the battle, he pulled the temple down on top of everybody. This is exactly what a nuclear weapon would do. We're going to have to leave it there with
And
that
he killed
nihilistic
and he
thought.
killed
Yes. Yes.
yeah and
And
Samson.
so for next time, Mohammed, we're going to end right now because it's stopping on us. Thank you so
Yeah.
much once again for everything we've learned from you. And we'll look forward to next program where maybe we can even continue to pick this up because there is